In a world where Thor has no CO2. Oh dear.
I have a confession to make.
Yeah?
And it's something that's been worrying me for the last few days.
Oh dear.
I was watching, not even an episode back, it was just a bit of pit stuff. And I realised that I might have accidentally plagiarised our logo a little bit from Aftershock.
It is probably quite similar, isn't it?
Yeah, it was just that thing of, oh, I know, I could do like a blueprint thing and do an asymmetrical disc because that's like really recognisable. And I thought that was a totally original idea. So it kind of hurts a bit to go, oh, I probably just saw that and subconsciously remembered it. After last episode, I did take a look through my notes just to see if there was anything that didn't come up or I didn't get to mention. And there's one fairly key piece of information that we didn't go through. And that is the fact that PP3D wasn't originally meant to be in that heat. They replaced a robot that basically turned up not working or wasn't ready to go into the arena on time. And they were asked if they were happy to move. So they found out who was in this heat, found out who was in their original heat, and decided that this one was a much safer heat. Far less big destructive things. Which is ironic because the thing that destroyed them most was them.
Yeah, the one destructive robot they couldn't get away from was themselves.
They turned around and every time they were there.
Like trying to run away from your own shadow.
And of course, it's interesting because it's the team that have said it was a very spinner-heavy heat. And when you look through the heats, that can only really be, one of one or two. That's either Heat A, so you've got Aftershock and you've got Sabretooth. That's not hugely spinner-heavy. Or more likely, it would have been the Carbide heat.
Yeah, well, if they've got an opportunity to avoid facing Carbide, then the sensible thing to do is avoid it.
The question is, does this, this sort of slightly tactical, oh yeah, we'll happily come out of that heat, does that put in jeopardy the legitimacy of the sporting competition?
I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not sure what to make of that.
I'm just trying to court controversy early on here. That's what I'm doing, really.
Are you lamenting the fact that this wasn't, in my view anyway, a particularly controversial episode? Heat.
Not that again. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm anticipating, I suppose. We'll get there on that. The other thing I want to mention is, once again, we've had a robot that we didn't necessarily love in Cherub.
Yes.
But it occurs to me that if there should be any robot which is going to stand out as the sort of official robot of the Spinnerproof podcast, it should probably be Cherub.
I mean, I'm not sure I want this to be the kind of podcast that has an official X of the Spinnerproof podcast. I think that's been done somewhere else. I think if we ever have an official robot of the Spinnerproof podcast, it needs to be the Antweight that you or I, or that you either make or that we work on together or something.
There's something I can guarantee that will not be in any way Spinnerproof. If I have my weight, it'll be made of foam board.
I think foam core would not be the ideal material for making a robot in any weight class.
But it also wouldn't be the worst.
What would be worse than foam core?
Wood.
Why would wood be worse? If you're building...
Because if you're going up against spinners, wood would give them a solid bite point to then throw you around as part of the hit. Whereas foam core, they're just going straight through it. There's also a very good chance that foam core would essentially entangle.
That's an amazing idea. For a robot, even in a heavyweight thing, just no armour, or have removable armour, and then have a really small chassis, and then a much bigger shell of foam core that's a long way away.
Just armour the whole thing in polystyrene that's about 1 metre thick.
Cover it all in aluminium foil or something so that it looks like metal. And then Carbide comes at you and just slices straight through you, doing nothing else. It's like trying to fight a cloud.
I don't think I explained myself very well with Cherub. I sort of admitted my own hypocrisy, but I want to go a bit deeper into my spinner killer philosophy, because I love the idea of having something very well armoured and very solid that can take a few hits from a spinner and hopefully get in and do some damage itself. But that's the key thing. They have to have a way of actively winning a fight. Just seeing something outlast an opponent, and we're going to see this today, that's no fun. How many robots actually beat PP3D in that episode?
Well, I think PP3D is a bad example of this kind of thing because you're not waiting for very long
True.
for PP3D to tear itself to pieces. It doesn't take long for that fight to end itself. Whereas if you're fighting someone like Aftershock, then maybe you need a way of actively damaging them. I reckon the thing is, I think the best way to deal with a spinner is to have a spinner that can do damage faster than your opponent can, I think.
When you say do damage faster, what do you mean by that?
Well, what do I mean by that? I think a lot of that would just come down to luck or slightly better driving about who gets the good hit first. If you've both got these huge spinners on you, I think you can try and stack the deck a little bit in your favour or indeed against you if you have a spinning weapon that's spinning in a different plane. So if you're fighting a horizontal spinner, maybe having a vertical spinner or a drum. If you catch their weapon in the right way so that it knocks it out of its plane, its natural plane of spinning, that can do a lot of damage, I would imagine.
When it comes to sort of fighting fire with fire and putting spinner against spinner, there's an element of rock, paper, scissors there. So, for example, drums tend to do very well against discs because the drummer's got a good chance of catching the disc somewhere other than the tooth and throwing that up. Whereas a bar versus a drum is a slightly different sort of set of physics happening almost, and a bar against a disc is yet again another thing.
I would argue that the physics is approximately the same. I think it's the probability of things that change.
True, yeah, that's probably a better way of putting it. I appreciate that. The other way in a spinner versus spinner situation to get an advantage is simply by having the better reach.
What do you mean by reach?
So let's say we had a bar versus bar situation. They're both horizontal. The one that's got the longer bar is going to be able to hit the other before they get hit. It's kind of like being in a fight against your little brother or something and putting your hand on their forehead. They can swing at you as much as they like, but they're not going to get there because you've got the better reach.
What, my little brother who's taller than me?
It's a general example.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's fair enough.
Yeah, it's... The whole meta is moving towards how do we deal with spinners. And the fun answer is bigger spinners. But realistically, that's going to end in a lot of very short fights. And okay, a fight might get ended in a spectacular way, but that doesn't make it a good fight. Whereas having robots around, like Cherub, but not Cherub, I think it gives you a better chance of some upsets, it gives you better variety in the competition, and it gives builders who haven't got, the years of experience behind them or a bunch of competitions behind them just to hone a robot, it gives them a chance to come in with something that can be reliable and effective first time.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that the meta will be forcibly changed by the BBC adjusting the rules to make it harder to have an effective spinner than it is to have the meta change as a result of someone coming up with a clever design. That's my suspicion.
Do you mind if I throw a little Series 10 spoiler in here?
Go for it.
Entanglement is allowed in Series 10 in a limited way. So the BBC have already put in a rule change to try and address the spinner dominance.
Yes, I mean, that is so clearly targeted at dealing with spinners.
To be fair, the way that they've done it, I think it makes it really hard to have effective entanglement. So it's got to be something that is, and I'm paraphrasing here, so forgive me if I get something wrong. It has to be deployable, not just something that's passively there. It can't be a net or anything woven, any kind of mesh, and individual parts of it can't be any more than I think it's a metre long.
So Thor has been redesigned for this series. It is a much smaller body. It's, I would say, longer and thinner. Well, maybe not longer, but it's certainly, relative to the old one, it's longer and thinner. And it's got a different axe head on it. It's got a much more axe-like looking thing as opposed to a hammer-looking thing on the end of it. And generally upgraded. I think he said he's got a new drive and it's a more powerful axe and all kinds of fun things like that. And a much more aggressive wedge on the front of it for getting under other robots. What
we've got here is a mix of the old and the new because, of course, Thor got absolutely eviscerated last time out.
Carbide took it to pieces.
Yeah, it was... It was basically taken apart for him. He didn't have much work to do when he got home to get it apart. It is smaller, and that's allowing for slightly sort of better armour. And the whole shape of it has kind of been designed to reduce the amount of bite points. It used to have those big wheel pods on the side, which were a really easy target for the big spinners. And that was really its undoing against Carbide. In terms of upgrades internally, the drive is a lot better. The hammer is supposedly more powerful. You say it's a different axe head. He's still got the old hammer as well. This is a slightly lighter version to allow for the slightly heavier wedge. But as we're seeing with most designs now, he's got a couple of different wedges and a couple of different hammers, which in different sort of combinations will keep him within the weight limit. The one issue I see with this version is that the drive is now coming from very far back on the robot. It used to be very central, and that made it a really easy robot to control, and we saw how good he was at controlling it last series. This time, it just doesn't look as nippy to me because of that.
Yeah, I think it does handle differently, and I think he did have a hard time getting to grips with that. I've got a note somewhere else that he did seem to be driving it worse than I remember from last year. I think that's a combination of a different drive system, and like you said, having the wheels and the drive wheels further back. I also wonder how much that's to do with much lower ground clearance at the front, because he keeps catching on bits of the arena floor throughout his fights.
Also, don't forget that the previous version he'd been fighting with for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knew that machine inside out. And after the carbide fight, everyone knew it inside out as well.
Up next, we have Tauron, which is a vertical spinner. 20 kilogram. Was that a bar or a spinner? Can't remember now.
It's a bar. I don't know where you've got the figure 20 kilograms for, because I've got 13 down.
In the television programme, they said 20 kilogram spinner.
Well, they love to get things wrong on the programme, but they also love to get things wrong on the website, so now I don't know what to believe. Now, Tauron's really interesting to me because it looks a bit big and a bit clunky. In a way, it looks a bit Series 7, but it is managing to innovate at the same time. So this big front end they've got, I think, is absolutely ingenious. They've built it in a sort of slightly modular way so that all of the drive is in that rear section, and then the workings for the weapon are in that front section, sort of completely isolated, which means that that front section can move independently to make sure that if it's inverted, the weapon is still sat at a nice angle to the ground.
Oh, so that runs, if that's on, that's on a pivot then, isn't it? And then it can run against the floor or something. That's clever. I hadn't spotted that. I am looking at this picture a bit more closely. I can see that it's a chain-driven bar, which I question the strength of chains, but I don't know how else you do it, I guess, other than directly driving it.
Chains aren't ideal. You get a lot of people using belts as well. The idea with a belt is that it can slit, and that's going to give you a sort of bit of the action of a clutch as well. The other thing to note with the weapon drive is that it's completely reversible. So again, if they're inverted, they just reverse the weapon so that it's still sort of uppercutting rather than coming down on things. So they've done a lot of good thinking in the way that they've designed it.
Yeah, that's a very clever robot.
I'm not sure that the build itself is really... it's very much a first version, it's very much a first entry.
Well, it's their first, well, according to the television programme, it's their first robot ever that they've built. They've gone straight in with the heavyweight things, and they've done a very clever design. Maybe not the best execution of that design.
But again, it's nice to see innovation coming in. We have so much of that in this episode, really. There's lots of really interesting designs, which is absolutely great. Not that any of them survived, but, Talking of first-time heavyweight entries, do we skip ahead to Concussion quickly?
So Concussion is a drum spinner. Sorry. Concussion is a drum spinner!
Eventually you're going to get bored of that.
No, it's going to be funny every single time. It's another first build. So this team look like a really great team, actually. I really like them. And they were apparently in the audience last year and then decided they were also going to go straight in at the deep end, build themselves a heavyweight robot and enter on the Robot Wars. And they've done a very good job, I would say. It's a very nice looking robot, potentially a very powerful robot as well.
The finish on that robot is just superb. The welding job seems to be really nice. They've got that beautiful bent polycarbonate on the top as well. So when we talk about what you would call a standard drum spinner, I think it just manages to move sort of outside of that realm a little bit.
Yeah, it's still obviously it's the framework for a fairly standard drum spinner, but they do have a nice little flair to it. I love the look of all the bolts that are holding, despite all the welding, there are a bunch of bolts on the outside. They might be purely aesthetic, I don't know, but they do look cool.
Now, we talk about them as a first-time team. They did have a touch of help. Quite a few of the team are colleagues of Ian Lewis from the Razor team. So he's advised on quite a lot of things. And Simon Scott from the Razor team is the person that machined the drum as well. Because the drum design they've gone for is complicated to say the least.
Is that so? What can you tell me about their drum?
So they've done what a lot of people do in terms of a drum, in that they've gone for an asymmetrical design, a single tooth. And it's machined from literally a solid piece of what I'm guessing is a sort of good tool steel. Apparently it took about 30 hours of machining to get it made.
Good lord.
It is a serious bit of kit. It's 24.5 kilos at 6,000 RPM with a lot of engagement on the tooth as well. It is a serious bit of kit, which, because of the way that it's been designed and the materials they're using, we shouldn't see it doing what Sabertooth's did and just shattering. They've built that thing to last, which is good, because when it takes 30 hours to make, you don't bring a spare.
I just think the cost of that alone.
Oh, it'd be stupid. The build apparently went about 4 times over budget, but they've brought in a lot of really smart touches. So, for example, they've custom made their own removable links in a way that they believe will stop them coming out too easily. So they've really looked at the small details and tried to get those right. It's 3 completely separate power systems for each side of drive and the weapon, and they've put it together in a way that's quite easy to take apart for repairs as well. So for a new team, they're doing all of the thinking very well.
I agree.
Moving swiftly from that joy of engineering onto Chimera 2.
I love this robot.
You're such a wild card, I don't even know anymore. I don't know you.
I'm kidding. I don't love this robot. I just wanted to see what your reaction would be if I said that. I do not understand this robot at all. That is a really weird design. I don't get it.
How did you feel about Stinger in the old days?
Stinger was the 2-wheel thing, wasn't it, with a lump of metal on one end, which I quite liked actually. I was all right with that. It's the wedge on the front of this one that I don't understand. Like, Stinger looked cooler than this, and like I've expressed in the past, that makes a big difference to me. But this doesn't work in the way that Stinger does. I think it's that wedge on the front of it does weird things, and I'm looking at the website. And apparently it's a NiCad battery.
Yeah, they haven't necessarily gone with the top-level internals.
Which blows my mind. Why would you use a NiCad battery when there's lithium polymer batteries in the world?
Well, look at this another way. Why would you use LiPo to save weight? They're not up at the weight limit as far as I recall.
They're at 108 kilograms.
Okay, I'll take that back then. They're idiots. But, you know, again, quite a lot of teams prefer to go for the reliable, trusted tech. You can kind of understand that as a decision.
Yeah, but how is LiPo not a trusted technology at this point? I mean, every single battery any normal person ever interacts with the exception of like AA and AAA, but I'm talking like rechargeable things in phones and laptops and tablets and God knows what else. They're all lithium ion or lithium polymer. In most robots, they're lithium polymer. In most remote control stuff, they're lithium polymer batteries. I don't understand. I don't know. I guess just cost, or maybe they had NiCads lying around for some reason. Who knows? There
are 2 very compelling reasons not to use LiPo. Number 1 is Chomp-a-Lot last series going up in flames. The second is that the greatest robot in the competition, Jellyfish, does not use LiPos.
I reject your second reason.
No, again, I think it's possibly a carryover from the old version as well, because the old version can't have been up at the weight limit. It must be the wedge that's actually brought them up. Although they have got rid of the big chunky tyres, so,
I don't know. I don't understand how it weighs as 108 kilograms. I guess it must be all in the wedge.
I do like the idea of the wedge. I think it takes it from being a boring thwack bot into something very slightly better. The issue I have is that the weapon is really lightweight, and I don't see that being effective at all. I don't think they've made enough of an upgrade from the previous one in terms of offense. It's basically Chimera 1 pushing an upside-down wheelbarrow.
The thing is, with axes and stuff, you need a lot of power behind them to do that, or to do that effectively. And I feel like you're going to need a proper pneumatic system, or something like that, similar to Thor or Terahertz, or many other axe-wielding robots. Whereas, like you said, this is sort of like a thwack bot, which I think can be very effective, like using your whole body and your drive system effectively to bring your axe around. But I think you need to be a much more mobile robot. I think you need to be able to spin on the spot very quickly for that to work. I think Stinger worked because it could spin quite quickly. I'm just not sure this design is effective. I can't imagine you can get a threatening attack out of a tiny little axe on the end of that robot.
The one piece of evidence we have that a thwack bot can work is Gabriel, because Gabriel does deal some damage. But that's much, much bigger.
Yeah, it's a much bigger axe.
It's got a lot more weight behind the weapon. You know, the fact they're using the big wheels as well gives it a bigger swing. There's a lot of better decisions have been made in the design of Gabriel than in Chimera.
Yes, I agree.
So, realistically, should we say 3 good robots in this melee?
Concussion, potentially Tauron, and Thor, yeah.
Obviously, we're doing all this with hindsight. We know how the melee goes. We need you to say, yes, there's clearly 2 favourites here.
We could do, but like, yeah, trying to trying to be honest with ourselves, I think Tauron has potential to be very good, but I don't think it was very good in the melee. I think it was all about Thor in the end, really. Thor and to an extent Concussion.
I think we can just about give Concussion the credit for the killer blow on Tauron.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
You know, the melee starts, Tauron doesn't really go anywhere, it's trying to get spun up to speed, it's rushed by Thor very quickly, and then it's Concussion that come in and get a whack on the side that seems to jolt it enough for that removable link to go out. So it's kind of Concussion's KO, but it's also kind of a self-KO because at this point, we should be better than Link's falling out. The other reason I'd say that it's not necessarily Thor's fight is that they do have a bit of a sort of drive or control hiccup over by the wall.
They do, yeah. They were stopped, or he was stopped for quite a while.
After the fight, I think he claimed it was likely to be an issue with the batteries.
Yeah, he talked about battery chemistry, which I think I agree with, potentially being a thing. Like, very cold batteries don't work very well. They don't deliver as much current, and you know, he could be having dropouts on anything in there, or just having not enough current to drive the motors, or having dropouts on his receiver, all kinds of things. If they're freezing cold, which they certainly would be, filmed up in Scotland in the winter.
But we've got Tauron gone, it's down to 3. Concussion gets a good hit on the front of Chimera's wedge, which sort of chews up that front lip quite nicely. And then it's just, well, the two of them ganging up on it, really, and it eventually dies.
It does. I feel like it dies from a couple of hits from Thor, if memory serves. But yeah, it just sort of dies unceremoniously. I would say it was quite a boring melee, really. It was sort of interesting. Thor got stuck quite. This is where we first start to see a lot of problems with the arena itself, the arena floor not being completely flat, and given how perfectly flush to the ground that Thor runs, it gets stuck on things, potentially nails or bolts that are sticking up, or certainly on the edge of the pit and stuff like that, where it can only get out if it goes backwards because of its front wedge and stuff like that. Which I feel like is a recurring theme in this heat.
There is an argument among the builders that you should have a higher ground clearance at your back so that you have got a way out of those situations. Quite a lot of builders like to sort of design something that's a completely zero ground clearance all the way round. But that does leave you susceptible to issues like that. You know, you could easily get high-centered on something. And I think it is a sort of very deliberate thing to have that ground clearance at the back.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, it's, you know, he's got his wheels exposed and stuff. There's no way that's not an intentional decision there.
Because otherwise, it's quite a risky thing to do if there's not an upside to it.
Yeah, I mean, if he was in a battle with a flipper and stuff, obviously they want to be coming in from the side or the back there. So it is a weak point, but it's necessary with this arena.
And also, with his driving, particularly on the last version, I think he could trust himself to keep the front pointing at an opponent at all times.
Yeah, not so sure he could do that with this one. But maybe with some practice he'll get there.
At least this one hasn't been completely mashed up and he can use it again.
Indeed.
One thing to also note at the end of this fight is that Concussion has ended up without drive on one side, thus setting up the theme of the heat.
Yeah, Concussion's theme is their left side drive not working. They had a lot of problems throughout this whole thing with their motors or speed controls and electronics burning out and breaking up, which normally I would have a go at them for, but I'm willing to let them pass. Seeing as they are first-time builders with no experience with these things, I'm willing to give them a bit of a pass here and hope that next time they come back with correctly designed electronics.
I believe they were intentionally running too much power through the motors to try and get a bit more performance out of them. And for the final, I know they did dial it down a bit.
If they were intentionally overdriving those motors, then they're all idiots. But
that is an if, though. I don't have confirmation on that.
If this wasn't an intentional thing and they just burnt out due to some oversights in the design process, I'm okay with it for this team. For a more experienced team, I wouldn't be okay with it, but for these guys, I'm fine. What
we're going to do after the show is compile a list of errors that Sam will allow competitors to make based on the numbers of entries they previously had. you know, after 2 entries, you're allowed to, I don't know, go in with a flat tyre? What are you allowed to do?
After 2 entries?
Actually, that's a bit rookie for that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you went in with a flat tyre into 2 entries, I mean, I'd argue by that point you shouldn't be having an air-filled tyre, but you know...
Hey, it adds a little bit of extra suspension and a bit of shock mounting.
It does.
PP3D did it for that exact reason. It works so well.
Yeah, that really absorbed all the shocks from their weapon there. It all went to the tyres.
But it's a shame not to see anything of Tauron. We have got 2 good robots through. Not many complaints.
Yeah, like I said, I think it was a fairly dull thing. It would have been really cool to see Tauron, especially having looked at it a bit more closely now with its clever vertical spinner design and stuff. I think it would have been a very interesting robot to see. Alas, They didn't do so well. Hopefully we'll see them next year or next series. And
You flirted with disaster there.
one day I'll get it. Moving swiftly on to Melee 2, in which we see Foxic, Expulsion, Heavy Metal, and MR Speed Squared. So should we start with Foxic, the flipper?
Is it a flipper or is it a lifter?
It was described as a flipper, so, you know, I'm going to go with...
They describe lots of things as lots of things, and they're quite often wrong. I'm calling it a lifter.
I don't think I've ever seen its weapon actuate, so I don't actually know.
It's on an electric drive, so I'm calling it a lifter.
I'll go with lifter, yeah. I think that's not flipping anything, that's lifting things up. But yeah, I've never seen it work, so who knows. They had an interesting strategy, or he had an interesting strategy with this. He was talking about having the sort of backwards-facing spikes type things on the top of his robot to get under someone and then drag them around. He was talking about maybe putting them in the pit, and it's like, that takes a lot of driving skill to take a robot that's on top of you and put that in the pit without pitting yourself.
Well, you just lift the lifter up and they slide off the back.
I suppose you would, but again, does that lifter work? Until I've seen it move, I'm convinced that's not got an active weapon. Maybe it flips. Maybe it's a flipper by virtue of ramming into a robot sufficiently fast that it gets thrown off the top of its wedge.
Oh god, like Storm 2 versus, I think it was Iron Ore, maybe? Back in Series 7, they managed to put a robot out of the arena just by hitting them hard enough.
I'm just going to take your word for it. Your memory of the old series is ridiculous.
There's people better, that's the worst thing. I love Foxic.
I do not love Foxic.
You can't deny that the design of it is just brilliant. The visual of it. How can you not love it?
Quite easily.
I think the shape of it and its stance is properly badass.
This robot is form over function.
I think it has both. I really do believe it has both.
That lift doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. It just looks cool, and that's it.
Because we're doing this after the event, you get to sit there all smug because you know it's going out.
Yeah, but I know that in 2 series, I've never seen its weapon move, and I've never seen it win anything. This robot is all looks. It's got nothing to back that up. It's the Basil Brush of robots.
Your facts are right, but your conclusions are wrong. How do I get this through? It's so annoying.
It is, in this case, you are the one that is ranking aesthetics way too high. It's not me.
Foxic internally is a very good build. It's got an extremely good drive, it's very nippy, it's very controllable, it's got multiple attachments for the lifter, which I always rate, it's got extremely thick armour, up to 15 mil in places. It's a very solid machine.
Good for them. Next time, make the weapon work.
Alright, who do you want to talk about next then?
We have Expulsion, which is a spinner built by a student team with apparently no self-righting mechanism, but their wheels do stick out the top of their robot, so I don't know what they were worried about.
This is an example of a school team done right.
Yeah, it's a reasonably good-looking... a robot with a reasonable amount of potential, I would say. I don't know how much of it was actually built by the students. I don't know. We'll have to... maybe you have some background information.
Supposedly most of it, pretty much.
Yeah, I'm willing to believe that. And it's got an interesting weapon design as well. It's got that spinning disc with the teeth, the 4 teeth that will flick out at a certain speed, which is an interesting design. So they can almost spin it up internally without any other robot being able to stay on them and stop that. And then the teeth flick out and catch on a robot and send it flying to the other side of the arena, hitting a wall and tearing the wall of the arena down, stopping the fight. Oh, wait.
What I love about this robot is that they are trying to innovate. And whether it works or not, innovation is worthwhile. Especially when you're coming in with a weapon that a lot of people use, you've got to do something different with it. And the fact that a group of kids are managing to come up with something that no one else has thought of, or that other people have thought of and just discounted, I really love.
Or, consider this, that other people have thought of, investigated, tested, and concluded is not worthwhile. That's the other thing that could happen here.
Absolutely, but it's worth giving it a go. Even if you don't think it's going to work very well, it's worth giving it a go, and they've done that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting design. And it's something I've considered something similar to this as well for robot building is if you had a spinner or a disc or a bar or something you can spin up internally and then throw the whole bar. I mean, the idea I've had is to have the entire bar basically be retractable, so you can spin up internally and then drive the whole thing out, as opposed to having things that flick out of your out of the out of the disc.
So what you're saying is that they've come up with a more elegant solution than yours?
I do not think they've come up with a more elegant solution.
Fewer moving parts. Always a good thing.
So if this works the way I think it works, which is that it will eject the spikes at a certain speed, then that's presumably friction-based, which means you haven't got a lot of control over exactly when you deploy those things. Whereas if you have a retractable bar that's on like a linear actuator that you can move in and out, you can spin it up and keep it sped up inside your robot until the optimum moment and then basically press a button to send it out.
But under your system, you've got a huge amount of energy contained in a system that you've then got to move around reliably.
Yeah, I mean, this is pure, armchair engineering. I've never built that. One day I might. So, there's a very good chance that you're right, that trying to move that much mass is going to be... See, I'm thinking about it now. I'm saying it out loud. Does the fact it's spinning change anything? I don't think it...
No, but the fact it's going to hit something does.
Yeah, that does make a difference.
It's moving along the plane of rotation, so it's not going to have any issues with gyroscopic force or anything like that. But once it's extended and hitting something, you're then sort of applying torque to that whole system when it hits almost. I'm not explaining this brilliantly. I'm kind of imagining... I'm literally looking at my laptop now and imagining ejecting my disk drive as it's spinning.
Yeah, I can...
That's the sort of setup I'm kind of seeing.
I can see that there are potentially weak points. I mean, I don't know. I think there are pros and cons to all these things. I don't know whose would be better. I'm not going to say that my idea is better. It's just different and very similar to what they've come up with. And I am glad to see something like that. It's sort of vindication that kind of idea is potentially useful.
The other bit of innovation is that they're using a kind of KERS-style system to recharge their batteries. Now, we did say about PP3D doing this, but they did it as a bodge job to spin down in time. These guys actually planned it. I don't think it's going to help at all. I don't think you're going to have any trouble with running out of power in a 3-minute fight. But again, I like that they're trying this stuff out.
Yeah, I think that's a clever solution to a problem that doesn't need to exist. I think the more pragmatic solution to the problem of running out of batteries is put a bigger battery in your robot. Build it to last 5 minutes and then you're going to be fine, So it's sort of... But yeah, you're right. It's cool that they're doing it and, it's cool that they can spin down a bit faster as a result.
And again, I'm also thinking about this from an educational point of view. If you're their teacher, you're really glad that they're trying this stuff out.
I'd love to know what school or university they're going to that allows them to do this.
Well, I mean, the name of the school is literally the name of the team, so that's quite a good start. Is it Brentwood or Collingwood, this one? I can't remember. That info's out there. Get it yourself if you want it.
I will go and find it.
The other final factoid about them that I really love is that they were one of only 2 or 3 robots that were considered too dangerous to test in the test arena. And they had to be tested in the actual arena because the fear was that one of the teeth could just come loose and fly out.
Yeah, that is definitely a danger there.
I'd quite like to see it personally, but...
MR Speed Squared.
We need to deal with this name. This name is vexing me because I know that it's meant to be a reference to some kind of formula in physics and I can't quite nail down which one it is. Because we've got MR, we've got speed and we're squaring something. I'm thinking rotational inertia, which is mass times radius squared. Inertia kind of being slightly analogous to speed, but not really. The other one I'm looking at is angular momentum, which is mass times speed times radius. But I'm fairly sure they're both wrong, and it's really annoying me.
Conclusion, we don't know anything about this thing. They are a full body spinner, which is
It's not a full body spinner. The whole body doesn't spin. It's a ring spinner.
The outside of their robot spins real fast, and which is an interesting and scary design, I would say. I would not do this if I were building a robot. I think it is not worth the complete lack of control you have over it if it becomes even slightly tilted, as you saw later on in this melee.
The idea of a ring spinner is you're overcomplicating the full body spinner. A full body spinner isn't hard to make. So look at Typhoon 2 from Series 7, the Champions. You build a robot, you put a weapon drive out the top of it, attach it to something and bring it down all the way over the side. It's a really easy thing to set up. You just do your bearings and all of that the same way you would a normal spinning disc, but it goes all around your robot.
Indeed.
To make a ring spinner, you've got to find a way of attaching it on the outside, sort of sandwiching it between bearings or between rollers or whatever you're doing. There's just so many unnecessary design challenges, and the only advantage you get is that you're invertible.
Yeah.
It's just... I love that they've tried it. It's got a lot of power in it. But it's just...
It's not worth it, really, is it? It's not worth the trade. I mean, the thing... So later on in this, or in this melee, you see that it just can't... As soon as it gets lifted slightly, the gyroscopic effects take over, and it escalates and escalates until it's throwing itself in the air and stuff. It's not a particularly controllable design, in my view.
And it's a shame, because it's got so much destructive potential, just like PP3D does. It's a huge spinner. It's 35 kilos of rotating mass. That's massive by any standards.
Yeah, and if they can spin it fast enough, then yeah, it's a deadly weapon.
And also, the teeth on that disc are just massive. So in terms of engagement, they can get some really good hits in. But it's got to work first.
Yeah, good luck to them. This team also had the... I don't know if we want to talk about this particularly, but that weird proposal thing. The guy was going to propose to his fiancée or his girlfriend or whatever if he didn't win.
Of all the gimmicks, this is the worst.
I don't understand. I feel like they were trying to be funny, and I don't get it. I don't think that was very funny.
I don't know who to blame. Do I blame the BBC for wanting human stories? Or do I blame the team for letting them have a human story? All of which is there to take valuable time away from the fighting.
Yeah, it's weird. I didn't get it.
The worst thing is, I really like the team. I don't want to be annoyed at them over this stuff, but it's not what I'm coming to the programme for.
Yeah, I mean, the main guy driving it, whose name I do not know, let me go look it up. He seemed like a really nice guy as well. It's just someone I'd like to know. Peter Forsey. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes you just see someone and you think, I'd just love to know them. They just seem like a really interesting and nice, funny person. And he, to me, is one of them. But
when we publish this episode, I'm totally going to tweet him from the account just asking if you two can be friends.
God damn it.
See how that goes.
No, unacceptable.
Then worst of all, he'll listen in to see if he wants to be friends, and all he'll hear is you saying, no, it's unacceptable. And he'll feel really bad, and he won't like you anymore.
That's fine, he doesn't have to like me. I just think he seems like an interesting person, but there you go.
But no, I completely agree. They are a super likeable team, and I can't explain why. They just are.
Yeah.
And without their gimmick, I'd like them even more. Talking of gimmicks, on to heavy metal and their inflatable instruments.
Heavy metal, a robot that is like a worse version of Wheelie Big Cheese.
It's a really difficult robot to do any sort of punditry on, because we don't have that much information on it. No one even knows what the weapon does. I'm not sure the team knows what the weapon does, and they built it.
I never saw it move, and unlike Foxic, where you can imagine what would happen if it moved, this one, what would happen if it moved? I just don't... It's not a flipper, it's not lifting anything, it's not serving any purpose in terms of self-righting, because it's an invertible robot. What does that arm do?
It's a rotating arm that is essentially a socket for various attachments, all of which seem to be differently shaped bits of sort of L section.
Yeah, there's nothing... They just never put anything on there that was worthwhile. It's just almost like, we technically have an active weapon, so let us compete with a rip-off of Wheelie Big Cheese. But it's, I don't get it.
It's a bit harsh on Wheelie Big Cheese to compare the two. Because Wheelie Big Cheese was all weapon, and this is no weapon.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying no. Like this is a really bad rip-off of Wheelie Big Cheese, which I agree was an excellent robot. So it's, yeah, I don't get it. I don't like this robot at all.
I mean, we're kind of getting on it a bit. There are elements of it I like. I like really big, wedgy, hardcore designs. I like that it's a big, heavyweight thing, and it occupies its space. It's got a nice look to it in that respect. Obviously, painting it pink and blue kind of takes away from that sort of intimidation a little bit, but that's their choice. It's also, in terms of the build, quite impressive. Because from what I understand, that thing has been built by hand. There's no laser cutting or anything like that going on, which, considering the material they're working with, which is Rayex, which is basically another brand the same as Hardox, that stuff is not easy to work with.
No, can't imagine it is.
And he's managed to get that together and make it all fit into that complex shape. So I've got a huge amount of time for him in that respect. I also like that they've completely abandoned the sort of design style they used to go with. So these are the guys that made 13 Black, the sort of double disc spinner robot thing. And they've sort of completely diverted from that idea and done something different. And again, I like that.
They can do all the different things in the world, and they can put all the effort into that in the world. If the result is a robot with a weapon that doesn't do anything, I'm not going to get on board with it. I'm sorry, wonderful team who built this robot, but I don't get it. I don't understand it. It's almost worse than jellyfish.
To be fair, at least you're consistent. I've really praised Expulsion for being innovative, and then I've complained about MR Speed Squared being a ring spinner when they could have just been a full body spinner. And now I'm back to praising these guys for trying something different, even though it is objectively a bit rubbish. At least you just hate the same stuff all the time.
This is the thing, you got to have an effective robot. This is a legitimate sporting competition. There must be effective in some way, and I don't think heavy metal is. But let's lay off them for now and talk a little bit about the fight, the melee.
At least there's a bit more to say about this one.
Slightly more to say, yeah. So Foxic with an interesting tactic of going straight for the pit.
You say interesting, it's a robot with by far the best drive power out there. Of course it's going to go straight for the pit.
Oh yeah, it's the sensible thing to do for them, and they did that and then didn't make good use of that, in my view.
Foxic started off absolutely dominating the fight. They got under Mr. Speed Squared, they got under Expulsion, they're doing everything right.
Yeah, but they've got no way of actually pushing anyone unless they go backwards, which he didn't do.
But when you've got two big spinners like that, first of all, if you tip MR Speed Squared up even by a couple of degrees, it's probably going to send itself out of the arena. And also with a robot like Expulsion, if you're under it, it's not hurting you.
Yeah, that's fair enough, but my bias against Foxic is coming through. They did very well until they got flipped and then couldn't self-right because their weapon doesn't do anything.
This is the point where I get to explain the problem.
Excellent. Why did it not move in this series then?
Craig Danby, very nicely, because he's a very nice man, had been helping Gabe Stroud and Team Legion fix up Sabretooth, which meant that he was kind of neglecting his own robot. He got called into fight, didn't have much time to prepare, and may have not got round to tightening up the bolt that holds the weapon on, meaning that when he tried to move it, the gears didn't mesh, and nothing happened.
Well, good for him, Mr. Nice Guy.
Now, I know what you're going to be thinking here. You're thinking that, you have to be a bit of a bastard sometimes, but, and you maybe should have done that before you left home would be another quite good argument. But if you're going to go out to a mistake, it might as well at least be a well-moralled mistake.
If you put your own oxygen mask on before helping others. That's what I'm going to say to this.
That's a beautiful analogy.
You can be a wonderful human being to your fellow competitors. He entered a robot that didn't work. It changes nothing.
He entered a robot that works very well, but didn't prepare it correctly.
No, it doesn't. The weapon doesn't do anything.
The weapon does work, it just wasn't prepared correctly for that specific fight. It's not the robot's fault. The robot is perfectly good. The robot is very good.
I have to see that to believe it. Like I said, this is 2 series now where that weapon has done nothing. Nothing.
At this stage, I would tell you to go watch this year's Robo Games to see it in action, but the courier didn't get it there in time, so you can't. Craig Danby has extremely bad luck.
He should be a less nice person.
He tried that first series, and it just made everyone not like him on telly.
That's true. That is true.
So while Foxic is sort of laid stricken on its back, we've got MR Speed Squared going round, producing a rather nice display by blowing all the dust away from itself, which I thought was quite a good thing to see.
That's quite funny, yeah.
I feel like all the big spinners can do it, but I think the arena is usually better swept than it was. But it does give a nice visual indication of how much power is in those weapons, as if we didn't already know that from them hitting stuff.
Yeah, it probably works best for MR Speed Squared as well, just because it's the full ring all the way around it, and it's just an even circle of dust moving away, which you wouldn't see, I don't think, with other robots.
Another robot you see it quite well with, because the weapon is kind of mounted on a frame almost, is Tombstone and also Last Rites. More Last Rites because you see it in competitions where the floor's a bit dirtier, but you get to see that power really well there. Meanwhile, Expulsion basically doesn't seem to have moved at any point. It's kind of bumping along like the Zeppelin it is.
It's a shame we didn't really see it do much. I wonder if it was it just not working, or was that the extent of its functionality? I don't know.
I think it was all weapon and no drive. With those 2 wheels that far back, and also not that far apart compared to the length of the robot, I don't see how it was ever expected to be able to turn.
Yeah, it can't get a lot of torque for turning around.
And unfortunately, one of the key things with building a spinner is you've got to be able to get the weapon pointing at an opponent. And they kind of got what was coming to them by getting attacked round the back by the only effective robot in the melee.
He was the only effective robot in the melee.
MR Speed Squared came round, knocked a chunk out the back, must have got to the drive or the batteries or something, and had them immobile.
I'm sort of so taken up with the fact that they can't control their robot. I forget that they do actually do some damage.
I don't know if it's more luck than judgment. They do get some hits in.
They do.
They've also, at some point during the fight, managed to land a hit on Heavy Metal's notional weapon, which means it is apparently now broken. Because before, it was doing so much.
What's interesting about the way that seemed to break is it almost implies there's an axle going all the way across the back, where there must be an axle going all the way across the back of it, which would have bent or sheared or something and messed things up big time. Which, yeah, that robot, man. It's rubbish.
So at this point, we've seen Heavy Metal fight once, and we still have no idea what its weapon does.
Yep, and rather frustratingly, it goes through because Foxic was upside down and Expulsion never really moved. So it goes through by default, along with MR speed squared.
So this is one of those melees that we don't want to see any more of, really, isn't it? Where you've got 2 good robots and 2 average robots.
Where you've got 4 rubbish robots.
I'm trying to be nice.
I'm sorry. Where you've got 3 rubbish robots and 1 questionable robot. I don't know, like 4 not...
Which one are you calling questionable out of interest?
MR speed squared. I think it's the only one that I would say actually won something in that. But despite their lack of control, it's the only one that I'd say won anything. Foxic, as we've covered, I don't like. Expulsion and Heavy Metal are... yeah, not great robots.
I can't wait for series probably 14 or 15 when Foxic finally works and takes the competition by storm.
Mate, the day Foxic
when
wins...
we'll be in our 4th or 5th series of the Spinnerproof podcast, and you'll be eating your words from our mansion of podcast money.
Podcast money from the advertisers that we have.
We're going to have so many sponsors. It's going to be great. We're going to be sponsored by, like, 3D printing companies and, I don't know, metal wholesalers. Hardox themselves are interested, I heard.
Heck yeah. Before we get any sponsors, though, we've got to cover round 2, which is the head-to-heads. So the first head-to-head is Thor versus Concussion.
Yet another example of 2 teams that have just faced each other in a melee being the first head-to-head. I thought it was really rare. Turns out it happens almost all the time.
So this is the first fight we see where both the robots, or where the pit is a real problem with the low ground clearance. Concussion and Thor both have quite low ground clearance, especially at the front. They've both got to be able to get under the robots that they're fighting. So they both get stuck on the pit that seems to be a good centimetre almost lower than the rest. Maybe not a centimetre, but like a good distance lower than the rest of the arena floor. So they both get stuck in the pit and they both sort of rammed in there, which is interesting. And you can see the pit being sort of bounced up and down. So it's not held up with a lot of force almost. Presumably it's on some kind of pneumatic piston thing, so it's just effectively got air suspension bouncing up and down. But
you like to talk about the sort of predictable parameters for various things in the builds. Surely the producers knew that pit, as a bare minimum, needed to be able to support the weight of 2 heavyweights, which is very predictably a maximum of 220 kilos. Did no one test this?
Well, I feel like it's a running theme in all robot fighting things of untested things being used for the first time on camera. So it doesn't surprise me that it wasn't really tested. I get it's probably, like I said, it's just presumably just like a pneumatic piston holding it up.
It must be pneumatic because it drops so quickly. I don't see a hydraulic system bringing it down that fast. Whereas the old one, I think, possibly was.
It definitely moved slower, didn't it?
Or was an electric system or something like that.
But I think it just needs like a pneumatic thing to move it up and down, but also a lockout at the top so that it can't be shoved down. Yeah, just continuing frustrations with the arena and the organisation of the programme that results in boring things happening, where both robots get stuck, which is annoying. Another interesting, potentially controversial thing that I noticed in this fight, based on previous conversations about the rules regarding how often robots can hit the pit button. Thor pressed it twice, and the pit button went down both times. No. What happened? So I think it hit it the first time and it got a Rogue House robot, hit it again and got a Rogue House robot, yeah.
I've heard 2 conflicting things. The first is that Jason, the driver of Thor, was unaware of that rule and went to hit it a second time hoping for the pit to go down. And either by luck or by choice from the producers, it didn't do that, and it's a Rogue House robot instead. That's the first theory I've heard. The second is that Matilda came out to try and free Concussion and keep the fight going, and to justify that in the edit, they spliced in footage of Thor hitting the button a second time. I've heard compelling arguments for both. I don't know which is the actual truth. Either way, dodgy things happened.
Yeah, it's very questionable. It's interesting that you mentioned about Matilda coming to try and free concussion because they then both got stuck there and Dead Metal came out.
Literally made it worse.
Dead Metal came out, freed Matilda, and then left concussion in the pit again.
The silly thing is that all of this stuff that shouldn't have happened has led to one of the most interesting climaxes to a battle I've seen in quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely appalling driving, really, from Jason. Driving to get one last hit on concussion there and just getting it a little bit wrong and being sent flying and upside down. And then couldn't self-right because he'd run out of CO2.
It is ridiculous because concussion is stuck there. He could inch up to it, line up the perfect shot and take his pick. But instead, he's kind of come in to ram it, but kind of winged it instead of going... It's just silly.
It is, and he knows it as well. Like, you can hear in the control booth, he says something to the effect of that was a stupid thing to do to himself. So like he knows he screwed up there. The result of that though is that concussion won,
and I think deservedly so.
Well, yeah, like that was a knockout. The rules were clear.
Absolutely, they've done the damage to Thor that's led to them not having power in the axe. They've dealt with a really bad situation, kept facing up, got that hit. Fair play.
Yeah, I mean it's not as if it was a judge's decision or anything. Like, you know, Thor was flipped over. That's it. You know. It is what it is. So we can move on then to MR Speed Squared versus Heavy Metal.
Now, these are two robots that you don't rate. Going into this, what was your prediction? What were you expecting to see happen?
I would have expected MR Speed Squared to win.
I was just seeing those wheels and having flashbacks to the last series when MR Speed Squared just tore Chimera's wheels off.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting to happen.
But what we get is a demonstration of good driving. All these people that say, oh, exposed wheels is a really stupid thing to do. No, it's not. As long as you can drive properly, all you need is a well-armoured front, and you keep that facing up to the opponent. And for all of the potential sort of downsides of their design, what they have got is a very experienced driver. And that's counted for a lot here.
Yeah, it was very, very aggressive driving right at the beginning, staying straight on their weapon to stop them from spinning up, which is exactly what you need to do against a robot with a spinning weapon.
And of course, the massive unreliability of MR Speed Squared then comes into play, and they've got no offense.
Yeah, they got nothing.
I wish there was more to say about this fight, but there's really not.
There is more to say about this fight because they both end up in the pit, I would argue, at the same time, and apparently that means that Heavy Metal win.
Is that controversial for you?
Yeah, it is. I think it comes down to... Yeah, it is.
I think it's very clear that Heavy Metal is on the offensive and pushes MR Speed Squared in there.
But with absolutely no finesse. Like, you both end up in there. I don't know, it's I'm not a fan of it. I mean that, you know, they've got to have a rule on this thing. It's the equivalent of like a photo finish. MR Speed Squared went in first, clearly pushed by Heavy Metal, so Heavy Metal win. But it's I don't know. It's a lame ending, if nothing else. I don't like the pit, and I especially don't like it when both robots end up in it at the same time.
I suppose the way to look at this argument is to try and argue the inverse, or to try and justify that MR Speed Squared should win that battle, and you can't.
No, I wouldn't.
They're very clearly the losers, aren't they?
They are clearly the losers, but it's just... I don't know. I would say that in those situations it should go to a judge's decision, and then the judges would have given that to Heavy Metal, and then Heavy Metal would have got 2 points and not 3, which I think is more fair.
That's reasonable. I can't argue with that.
But anyway, that's not what happened. They won outright and got 3.
And we still don't know what the weapon does.
We have more conversations with Noel Sharkey. Which really cracked me up. So he's talking about how robots are going to save the world, and they're using robots for exploring the polar regions and examining climate change up there and how polar ice caps are melting and stuff. And they also talk about how they've got these small robotic bees used for pollinating flowers and stuff, which, if anyone has seen Black Mirror, should be absolutely bloody terrifying.
I'm sat here chuckling to myself because it's exactly what I was thinking as well. Come on, mate. We've seen Black Mirror. We know where this goes.
Robotic bees, not a good thing. Please don't ever do that.
The second round of head-to-head sees Heavy Metal versus Concussion. Big rebuild job for Concussion.
A big rebuild job. Like I said, I'd sort of like mainly electronics problems that they're having, like burning out their motors and burning out all kinds of things. Like I said earlier, that's, you know, first time team. I'll let it pass this time, but if they do that next year,
then they're in trouble with Sam.
Exactly. I will come down on them like a sack of bricks.
Which would ironically result in a concussion.
So I don't think there's much to say about this fight. It's I don't have much to say about it. The result is that heavy metal gets its wheel removed by concussion, as you would expect, and the fight is over.
I think the real thing here is that it's the only time we get to see Concussion's weapon really doing what it's meant to. And you get to see the power that is contained within it when it sends that wheel flying.
Yeah, you're right. This is the rest of the time it does seem quite weak and it's not really doing much. But yeah, this time it is. Yeah, it's a really effective way of taking wheels off. It's a really effective way of taking wheels off.
I refuse to laugh. Not doing it.
Come on, that was a really good joke.
Yeah, dig deeper. Dig deeper, Sam. Good idea.
I'm going to dig wheel deep.
God. Hopefully we can get back around to the conversation.
Oh dear, go on then.
As is customary, Concussion has ended up smoking. Not entirely sure what the issue was. I'm guessing a motor or a speed controller again. But the really key thing to take from this fight is that we still don't know what that weapon does.
Up next we had Thor versus MR Speed Squared.
Bit of a grudge match from last time round, where Thor quite convincingly beat MR Speed Squared.
Yeah, and then quite convincingly beat them again.
It's interesting, the issue that MR Speed Squared are going into this fight with, where they've bent the main sprocket on their weapon drive. So they're literally trying to hammer it back flat to get that weapon working, because otherwise it's not going to mesh properly. I think it's a chain even, so it's going to throw the chain, and they've got absolutely no hope. And that's shown as they go in, don't spin up at all.
No movement, and then very, very aggressive and quite good driving from Thor there. I thought the armour on MR Speed Squared seemed a bit weak. I'm not sure if this is just because it was already punctured by Shunt, or if it's just that their armour is really weak. But it seemed like even Thor's axe could puncture that armour on the top there. It certainly seemed to tear a hole in the top armour.
Last series we saw MR Speed Squared come in and have to remove armour to make weight. And I feel like it's still a weight consideration, that lack of armour. But also, when you look at their design, in theory, when it's working, nothing should be able to get close enough to damage that top or bottom anyway. So that might also be part of the reasoning behind it.
I would have thought Thor has got enough reach to go and do damage to them without being hit by them.
It's a question of being able to time that hit. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, but I think an on-form Thor could do that.
Absolutely, but it's also running a big risk by charging it, trying to get that hit in.
Well, he's got that massive wedge of armour on the front of it. I think he'd probably be fine.
True, but the one thing I'm sort of imagining, and maybe it's less likely than I'm giving it credit for, that wedge would get under MR Speed Squared quite well. But the idea of that wedge really is to deflect blows. What I'm seeing is MR Speed Squared actually being able to ride up it while still spinning, and potentially damaging the hammer arm as it comes over as well.
Yeah, that would be a concern.
It's something that we saw happen to Beta in BattleBots against Tombstone, where the weapon mounting got completely wrecked.
Yeah, he'd just have to make sure he fired the axe early enough and he'd be alright.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do though, isn't it? But of course it's a moot point because MR Speed Squared never works.
No.
And it's one of the victims of the round-robin format, really, in that respect. And they're out, of course, at this point. They are mathematically out.
Yeah, that's it. They're done. No more MR Speed Squared, with the sole exception of Concussion versus MR Speed Squared.
Which, ironically, was their best fight.
Was it their best fight, though? The first thing they had was that their ring was unbalanced and they spun it up and immediately went flying.
But they weren't expecting to be able to spin up at all, so that's already better than they were expecting.
I've got a note here for more lenient rules.
We were told back in Heat A that if a team went in without a working weapon, that was a forfeiture. Whereas here we are, they're going in, ooh, does it work? Does it not? We don't know. Last time round as well, they went in, it didn't work at all, but apparently that's fine now.
Yeah, inconsistent rules are the most frustrating rules.
Let's face it, if you're not applying them properly, they're not really a rule at all. They're a guideline.
Yeah, well, all sports are, people following arbitrary rules for fun. And if you don't enforce those arbitrary rules, then it's not fun. MR Speed Squared goes and opens the pit because that's all they can do is hope that they can push people around. And Concussion seems to have a problem with not a problem with their drive, but with their driving, I guess. I feel like that robot can spin on the spot way too quickly. I think they have a hard time driving in nice curves, I think they sort of go forwards, turn a little bit too far, and then have to turn back a little bit and stuff. I think they could do with almost slowing the motors down when they're turning.
Interesting. I'd argue just practice more.
Or practice more, yeah. Both of these things are options, but I think that, they seem to be struggling to control their robot.
To me, the bigger issue they had here is that they are quite one-dimensional with that weapon design, and that's not a fault of them as a particular robot. That's a difficulty with the design itself, where they were faced with something that they couldn't actually damage the outside of, and if they did, it wouldn't matter. So while they've got a bit of pushing power, it wasn't really enough to do anything useful. And that's when their unreliability then kicks in, where they've ended up burning up another speed controller.
Yeah, more of the magic smoke that powers electronics escapes here.
I believe it was specifically a capacitor that blew, which means you get extra interesting smoke.
You get extra magic smoke. And I think it was the left drive system that blew up again.
Yep, the left every time, I think it was.
I think it was as well. Yeah, it's sort of weird that one always the one that went. And it went to a judge's decision, which surprised me.
I think they managed to stop working with less than 10 seconds to go and therefore couldn't be counted out.
That must have been what happened. So it was a judge's decision, and I would have predicted at that point MR Speed Squared to win, actually. I don't know why, because I think they were much more in control. They were much more sort of, well, not much more, but they seemed more aggressive to me. They had a bit more control of did they have more control? They seemed more aggressive, and their robot didn't have smoke coming out of it at the end of it.
They were still working at the end, which is always a bonus.
They were mobile, and concussion was not. I mean, all this boils down to I'm not sure that the judges should have been involved in this. I would argue that concussion were immobilised, and MR Speed Squared should have won. But it was a judge's decision that they gave to concussion.
It's a tricky one, and it's one that I don't think I can really go back and go through the judges' criteria like we did last episode on it, because I think we have got the right result. Out of the two, concussion is the better robot, and it had the better fight, I thought. But again, I've only seen a slightly edited down version.
The judges could have gone either way, and I probably would have been fine with it, to be honest. But I would say that it shouldn't have gone to judges in the first place, and that MR Speed Squared should have won.
Yeah, that's hard to disagree with as much as I want to.
But that's what happened. This round also, you mentioned, I don't remember if it made the cut or not, but you mentioned about the Jonathan Pierce armour versus armament, and This particular round had that more than anything else I've ever heard. It was hilarious. So I think the last time, you mentioned this when I was talking about the new segment at the end, and I talked about how we'd build a robot, and I used armament when what I meant was armour. And this is where I get it from, is Jonathan Pierce saying armament when he means armour. And now that you've tuned me into this, it's really, really annoying.
It's a very long-standing gripe among Robot Wars fans that he doesn't really seem to know any words. He'll call hydraulic things pneumatic and pneumatic things hydraulic. The only thing I can say for him is that in this case, it's almost valid, because MR Speed Squared is using its weapon, i.e. its armament, as armour. So you've managed to pick out one of the very few potentially valid uses of that term.
I don't think it's a valid usage of the term. I'm just going to go and read out the definition of armament here quickly. It is military weapons and equipment. So absolutely nothing to do with the armour on, or even the weapons on robots.
Hang on, so you're saying it's weapons used by a military?
That's the...
i.e. weapons used in war. A weapon being used on robot wars.
No, military does not equal war. The military is very different from something used in war. You can't make that leap.
In this case, the robots are equivalent to militia,
which
is a form of military.
They are not a military, and you know it.
They're a militia, I know. That's basically the same.
You're wrong.
I think that the definition you found is too thin. To me, armament means weaponry in general.
Yeah, I'm happy to go with that. I'm happy to go with weapons in general as armament. But Jonathan Pierce's use of the word anywhere in Robot Wars is almost certainly wrong.
Problem is, Jonathan Pierce, while not necessarily very good at what he does, is also completely irreplaceable. If you got rid of him, it wouldn't be right.
Oh no, it wouldn't be the same thing at all.
He's spent so long being wrong about Robot Wars, he's now part of Robot Wars.
So true.
So this leaves us with one final head-to-head, which is Heavy Metal versus Thor.
Yeah.
Now, I would come into this saying that the heavy metal weapon looks broken, but I'm not sure how we'd tell. It looks wonky, but maybe it was designed that way. You just don't know.
There's no way of knowing.
What I also like is that Thor have come in with the other wedge, which to me, and maybe this is more of a comment on my psyche than anything, it looks a bit like a bum. What it does allow them to do is put the big hammer on, which against something like heavy metal that you're not going to get through makes complete sense.
Yeah, they're going for blunt force trauma to win this one.
There's also no need for defence against it.
None whatsoever. They could go in with a wooden robot and they'd be fine. This is the battle for the foam core robot. A foam core robot with the biggest hammer imaginable. 60-kilogram hammer.
60 kilos of foam core on a foam core shaft.
No, what you should do is you should have a foam core robot with a tungsten hammer.
Tungsten? That's weirdly specific.
Tungsten is a really dense metal. It weighs a lot.
Why not just use obsidian?
Because tungsten is much cooler.
Yeah, that's fair. Isn't osmium denser?
I do not know. I'm just aware of tungsten. I'm going to go with what I know. I'm not going to start speculating about potentially more dense material. I mean, you could go with something like, I was going to say unobtainium, but that's not an actual element. But you know what I mean? One of those like UUU elements on the bottom right of the periodic table, you know, with the gajillion neutrons in there.
Its half-life is so short that by the time you get it to the arena, you don't have a weapon anymore. Good thing with tungsten is it's quite easy to get hold of. All you need to do is buy up thousands of light bulbs and just take the filaments out and melt them all down.
Tungsten is really, really expensive. So you can buy like 1 centimetre cubes of tungsten, and a 1 centimetre cube weighs about a kilogram.
What?
But they cost like 200 quid. It's not a cheap material.
If you ever need ballast for something, that's the way forward. If you ever need to cheat in a bobsled race,
yeah, tungsten.
You got it, mate.
Tungsten, it's a very dense metal. Ridiculous notions of how to fight heavy metal aside. Thor simply...
Your 1 centimetre cubed hammer.
I reckon if you built a hammer the size of Thor's out of tungsten, you'd probably have the majority of the weight limit of the robot in your hammer.
Imagine, you try to fire the weapon, the hammer point stays still and the robot just backflips.
That's probably what would happen. Thor simply rams heavy metal from the side and knocks the wheel off again. And that is the end of heavy metal.
I couldn't quite tell. Was it the same wheel that came off before? Or was it a different wheel? I think it was a different wheel.
I mean, if that was a different wheel, that's even more impressive, because I assumed it would be the same wheel because it would have been welded back on and therefore weaker. But if it was a different wheel, then even more impressive. Well, is it more impressive that Thor has the power to do that, or is it just showing how poorly the wheels are attached to heavy metal?
I'm not sure if Thor really knocked it off. There was a point early in the battle where its hammer came down and kind of went in the gap between wheel and bodywork, which may have done something.
Yeah, weakened it and then actually done the final knock-off, yeah.
But I feel like it's just the fact that it's been used and that metal's been under stress that's actually had it off. Which is why I think it may have been the one that didn't come off early. The one that came off earlier, by being repaired, has actually been brought up to near full strength. Whereas the other one is still sort of under that stress and weakened. But regardless of the reasons, it gives us the best sort of showmanship of the whole episode when Matilda comes in and sends it into orbit.
Demonstrating once again that Matilda is the most damaging of the house robots, I would say.
The second most damaging of the house robots. The one house robot whose damage you can't control, I will give you.
I miss Sergeant Bash.
Everyone misses Sergeant Bash. It's the elephant in the room.
I just want to put that out there. I miss Sergeant Bash.
Hashtag bring back Bash. It's not our hashtag, but we'll promote it anyway. And that's the last time I want to use the term hashtag, because I hate it. Into the final. Concussion versus Thor. The rematch of rematches. It's really not. I'm trying to hype this. It just can't be done. Last time, Thor was knocked over due to its own stupidity. What will happen in the rematch? Thor versus Concussion 2. The Ventoning.
So in this battle, Thor spends a lot of time running away, which seems odd given that it's fighting a spinner. It doesn't use his axe at all, and then vents all of his CO2, presumably not intentionally, but not all of it.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off.
Damn it! You beat me to that reference. I was
hoping to come up sometime.
I had a note for it in like episode 1, but it didn't come up naturally, so I didn't make it.
Yes. Winner.
So, Concussion, I would say, is definitely the more aggressive in this fight. They do manage to flip Thor again at some point, but Thor somehow has just enough CO2 left to put itself back up the right way. There was a moment where I was really concerned because Thor and Concussion were grappling and pushing each other quite a lot or being pulled around. And I was really concerned that was going to burn out Concussion's drive system, which I think it pretty much did at the end. And so that was a bit concerning, but they got apart and Concussion remained mobile for long enough for it to go to a judge's decision.
I think you've glossed over that self-righting a little bit there. That was very good work from Jason. He knew that he'd lost gas, and he saved that one usage of the weapon to self-right. That's good thinking. I rate that.
Well, did he save it, or did he just happen to have enough gas left?
I think he saved it. There were lots of times where he could have got a good hit in, but he's been burned by getting flipped by it once before. He's a shrewd man, that Jason.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to disagree on that. I think he just happened to have enough left, because my feeling is when you get flipped, you're going to hit whatever button it is to self-right, regardless of whether or not you have, or you think you have, CO2 in there, just in case. And I think that's what happened, but...
Oh yeah, it isn't about him thinking to self-right, it's about him thinking to not use the weapon offensively and use it defensively instead.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from him. Jason, tweet us, let us know. Yeah, judge's decision. I said my note here is that concussion should win, and shock and horror, concussion wins.
Thor's weapon not working throughout the fight is a thing that swings it, really.
Yeah, I would say so, and I do think that even by the weird definition of aggression, I would say that concussion takes that as well.
Yeah, both robots look tired coming into it. They're really victims of the format. It's anticlimactic.
Yeah, I don't really like the final being a judge's decision. It's a bit lame. I'm glad the concussion won, and it's really cool to see a first time team go through and win a heat. Possibly a little bit less cool now that I know they got help from the Razor team, but still cool nonetheless.
That makes it cooler. The torch has been passed. I love it. This all leaves us with one thing left to do. Ratings.
Lay it on me.
This week, continuing kind of along the theme of last week, I would like you to give this episode a rating by relating it to one of the series. If this was a series, what series would it be? I'm including extremes if you would like them. I will even allow you a couple of World Championships if you must, even though they were special episodes.
So, this episode, how would I... I'm going to need your help, because your memory of the early series is so much better than mine. I've just looked up list of Robot War series, and I'm shocked to discover that Series 1 was presented by Jeremy Clarkson.
You didn't know this!
I did know this, but I'd forgotten.
Oh, well,
that's amazing.
It's bad, but it's not as bad as it could have been.
Power! So, in this episode, I think there was a lot of rubbish in this episode. There was a lot of cruft, and generally speaking, a not controversial, fairly middle of the road episode. So, what would you say is a fairly middle of the road?
I'll give my answer.
Go on then.
But then you're going to have to steal it by the sounds of it.
Well, I just don't remember. I think it's unfair to use Series 8 or 9. I don't think either of them really apply.
Oh no, it's not that good.
And I don't remember enough about the early series, I'm afraid, to be able to pick one.
I've been a bit harsh on you, really, by asking you to do this. I was going to say it's like Series 3, because Series 3 was the time where robots were just starting to get properly serious. And heavy metal is the kind of thing that would have fit quite well then. And it's also a time where we had a lot of robots going down due to unreliability. The one thing is that for me, the defining feature of Series 3 is that the arena decided a lot of battles. And in this episode, that barely happened, which I quite like. So I'm going to put this... It's kind of Extreme 1, I'm going to put it. You know, we were starting to reach a point where we'd seen a lot of quite innovative designs, but there were new innovative designs coming in. And with this being kind of the episode of the newcomer and the episode of the new idea, I think that fits quite well. So that's my slightly ill thought out judgment in that I changed it last minute.
Fair enough. I'm going to throw you a curveball. I'm going to completely ignore your rating system.
That's probably the best answer.
And I'm going to call this the Sao Paulo Scrapyard, which was a level, an arena you could fight in Arenas of Destruction.
Can we just say that Arenas of Destruction is a series?
Well, it was an arena in the video game that I played a lot of, and it was quite a boring arena in my view. So
it was awful, wasn't it? It was just awful.
So that's what I'm going with.
I'll take what I can get from you because I know that you hate this bit.
Or is it the Tokyo Rooftop?
Hey, don't diss Tokyo Rooftop. Tokyo Rooftop was amazing.
The stupid bloody fans that lifted your robots up.
Yeah, and the glass that broke and the little zappy generator thing and the holes in the wall. It was amazing.
But what fan can lift an 80-kilogram robot?
In fairness, so could the CO2 jets in the normal arena.
Yeah, but that's like a high-pressure CO2. That's not a bloody ventilation fan. Like, this is the kind of stuff that that puts air conditioning through a building. It's not a CO2 jet.
Hey, high-rise towers in Tokyo have very serious ventilation needs, which require very serious fans. Haven't you seen these, like, skydiving places with fans that would lift people?
Oh dear. Yeah, but that's a big-ass fan. I'm gonna stick with my Sao Paulo scrapyard, because screw your stupid rating systems.
Fantastic. It's not the answer I expected, but it's the answer I deserved. It is, I suppose, time for the very eagerly awaited armchair engineering segment of today's show. And the thing I want to talk about is really me asking you for information. I want to know more about Omni wheels.
Okay.
Because I've seen them, and they're a bit of a mystery to me. Here's the mental image of an Omni wheel I've got. I've got two in mind. One is a hub with rollers at 45 degrees, and another is a hub and a kind of framework with rollers sort of perpendicular to the plane of motion. Is that making sense so far?
Yep.
It's kind of sideways rollers. And what I'm not understanding is how these wheels, A, create sideways motion at all, and B, maybe to a lesser extent actually, this is something I can envision a bit more, is how they then create sort of diagonal motion. Because I'm imagining there must be some kind of system that is driving those rollers, but I don't understand how that could work on something that is already rotating.
So, the way Omni wheels work, let's start with the hub with the 45-degree rollers on it. So if you've got two of these things and you rotate them both in the same direction, you're going to go forwards. So what you need is you need the diagonal things to be opposing each other, I think. And then when you rotate them in the same direction, you'll go forwards. And if you rotate them against each other, you'll go left or right, is my understanding of how this works. I might be wrong about the opposing directions of the diagonals bits.
So we're talking about, on, say, the left side drive, you would have the rollers on, say, the front left wheel, angled to be kind of forwards and right, for want of a better phrase.
Yep.
And then on the back, they'd be forwards and left, so at 90 degrees to each other. In terms of the rollers, this is, rather than the actual wheels.
I'm not entirely sure of how the direction of all the rollers has to work. I think, and that's probably the less important part of this. The important thing is that you've got 4 of these wheels that can be driven independently, and depending on which ones of those you drive forwards or backwards, you'll either move the robot forwards, backwards, or left or right. And you can also probably do some clever stuff with skid steering to rotate the thing, because you can get forklifts with these kinds of wheels on them.
So the idea is that by driving the wheels in opposition to each other, it creates sideways movement.
Yeah.
I feel like with this explanation, I'm at the stage where I could probably make it happen, but I wouldn't understand why it was happening.
Fair enough. I think that's about the best explanation I can give without spending a bit of time doing a bit more research. This is just sort of off the top of my head.
So I'm looking at images of a couple of sort of drivetrains that use them, and they are setting them up in the way that we describe. Presumably, to put that sort of system together, normal electric motors might not be ideal, because I'm fairly sure that with an ordinary electric motor, you don't have as fine control of its rotation as you'd maybe want. Would something like a stepper motor be more appropriate?
I do not know, and I'm going to have a bias against stepper motors because they're a pain in the to set up.
Fair enough. What makes them so difficult?
So my experience of stepper motors is at university, where we were writing really low-level drivers for them in C for a microchip to drive them. So you had to sort of think about exactly where the magnets were, pulsing the right terminals at the right time and stuff. So it was a really low-level approach to driving these things, and I did not like that. I feel like if you were actually going to use stepper motors or something in the real world, you just have something that just drives it, and you don't have to worry about it at all. So
what I'm sort of taking from this is that with these Omni wheels, you wouldn't necessarily need any sort of onboard computing or anything like that to run them. Could you do this with normal signal mixing?
I'm not sure you could. I think there's a bit more complexity there that it might be possible with normal signal mixing. It might not be. I really have no idea. I need to do it, I think, to understand that. But that's one type of Omni wheel. The other one you mentioned is a hub with a bunch of rollers that are at 90 degrees. Go look at pictures if you're listening to this. Go find a picture of Omni wheels and you'll understand what I mean by this one. These ones, I would guess you'd have to work a bit differently, where you've got, instead of having there's 2 ways of doing this. These would be really good if you had 4 of them sat on top of a sphere, and then you could drive the sphere in any direction, similar to the wheels in the film I, Robot. Or you could have them if you imagine you've got like a square robot, and you had one wheel at 90 degrees in the front center, one at 90 degrees at the front right, and then 2 more that are pointing forwards and backwards on the left and right of the robot, so you've almost got like a diamond underneath your robot. You would use the 2 motors on the side for driving forwards, backwards, and skid steering, and then you could also turn those off and drive the front and back motors to strafe left and right.
So the difference between these two styles of wheel is that this second group will give you active movement in their sort of normal plane of rotation, but passively could also be moved opposite to that without any resistance. They couldn't actively drive you sideways if they were arranged like normal wheels, whereas the other type could.
Yeah, so the first type you'd put in the conventional position for wheels. This second type with the 90-degree rollers, you'd need to do something unconventional. Like I said, either have them on top of a sphere. If you go look at the way, I'll put this in the show notes. There's a guy on YouTube, James Bruton, who does X-Robots. He builds a lot of stuff. He does a lot of 3D printing and builds a lot of cool robots. And he's built several versions of BB-8 from Star Wars. And one of the versions he does is he's got a very big, very light sphere, and then on top of that, he's got the head of BB-8 that effectively balances it, and he uses Omni wheels that are driving this sphere in the way that I've described, and it's this kind of Omni wheel that he's using to do that.
So in a combat robot sense, I can very clearly see the point of the 45-degree style. Do they have a separate name, by the way? Because that'd be really helpful right now.
I don't know.
Oh well. They don't, that's fine. I'm seeing the use of that 45-degree roller wheel in terms of you can actively give yourself sideways drive, and you're not necessarily losing very much in terms of, forward drive and traction. You can still have four-wheel drive, pointing forwards, all guns blazing for your forward drive. It sounds like the other style you would be making much bigger compromises to use.
Yeah. I feel like you'd probably get some advantages in strength, and their weight carrying capability would be my guess.
Because I'm trying to think of a way of applying them usefully. So say, for example, I've got a four-wheel drive robot, but it's quite long. And of course, that length does affect your ability to turn quickly. If I, for example, put this form of Omni wheel on the back, or even if it was just two-wheel drive and only front-wheel drive, if I put these Omni wheels on the back, that would presumably help me tighten up my turning circle. Because I could... I mean, we were saying, for example, the difficulty with expulsion earlier, weren't we? With their drive being right at the back.
I mean, at that point, they may as well just be a caster wheel at that point.
True. But casters, I feel like, have an element of unreliability because they've got to rotate with your movement. And if you want to suddenly go back on that movement, it's potentially putting a bit of stress on them. But I suppose at that point, you use something like a hard point or a roller as well, can't you?
Yeah, I think there are better things to do. I think you'd use Omni wheels to do strafing. I think you wouldn't use it to try and increase your turning circle. I think it would be if you wanted a robot that could strafe left and right without having to turn. That's when you'd use Omni wheels. And I'm trying to think what I would do if I built a robot. And I think I would use this second type with the rollers that are at 90 degrees.
But is that not going to affect your drive power and your traction?
The thing is, like, if you're aiming for a robot with strafing, I mean, for me anyway, the point of doing that is to outmaneuver other robots. I'm not interested in building. I wouldn't be interested in building a robot for pushing people around or anything like that. I'd be building a robot for maneuvering. I think you could probably do 8-wheel drive with these robots, with these things.
If in doubt, add more wheels.
But I honestly I'm just thinking. I reckon you could probably do 4-wheel drive in both axes.
Yeah, I suppose you could, couldn't you? But then you're doubling the amount of motors you need.
Yeah, you'd need a lot of motors to do it, but...
Suddenly we're adding a lot of weight and a lot of size.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I would do this. I would either... I'm trying to think how... I don't know. I'd have to... No, I don't know what I'd do. I think I'd be inclined to use these wheels. I think I'd be inclined to do a fairly small circular robot with just 4 of them that can do that's really manoeuvrable with the strafing. Maybe not a circular bot, probably still square, but like... effectively put these in a circle. I'd be interested to try and do 8-wheel drive and see what weight allowance would be left.
This genuinely might be a good idea for a full body spinner.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing with full body spinners or with the ring spinners and stuff like that is that you don't necessarily know which way is forwards. I know that looking at the pictures of the Typhoon thing, it had a little flag which I presume pointed forwards. And if you used Omni wheels, you wouldn't even need to be able to do rotation of the body. You just You just have one, your right stick or whatever, or your left stick in my case, from a gamer's point of view, to just move you around, just to translate you in X and Y around the arena without worrying about which way is forwards.
But you would still need to know which way you are pointing, because your movement has to have a reference point of some kind. This isn't like using an orbiting camera in a game. This still has a frame of reference from the robot's point of view.
I'm trying to think. I suppose there is a situation where the body would get... I mean, if you could guarantee that the body would never turn, you just line it up when you put it in the arena, you just line it up in such a way that you know that when you point up on the stick, it'll go away from you. And then at that point, and if you point left, it'll go left. And then at that point, you don't need to worry about it anymore because it will always be, you're just moving a point around on the arena floor that doesn't need to know about rotation. Whereas if the body got out of alignment, you would need to know. You could potentially do all kinds of cleverness to try and compensate for that with like inertial measurement units to try and say, always assume that this direction is up, and then whenever I press up on the thing, go in that direction. I don't know.
I'm wondering if there's potential for some kind of LiDAR system. Just set up 4 reflectors around the arena.
I don't think you'd be allowed to do that.
Yeah, but bring in 4 mini-bots with reflectors on them, park them.
I mean, if you could some way get a lock on something in the arena that's in one direction, you could do it, I would imagine. I don't know what that would be. You'd have to analyse the arena. It
would be stupid and pointless and not worth the effort, but I want to see it done. For the sake of innovation, I want to see it done.
So I would really love to build a strafing robot that is useful. I don't think I wouldn't do a full body spinner. I don't think with this kind of omni-wheel. I would do a robot that has forwards, backwards, turning left and right, but also strafing, just to wind up people like Thor.
Why would that wind up Thor in particular?
Well, you know, robots where they've got to almost like pause for a second. I can just imagine the situation where they've got to pause to line up a shot, and then your robot just shoots to the left without rotating before they fire their act, which would really crack me up. But that kind of thing, I don't know. I think a strafing robot would be really funny to do, and I'd love to do it.